Valkyr Rework. There's a lot of things that I will be discussing about today, ranging from her gameplay to her design, basically everything, thus timestamps. Do use it to your biggest advantage. The first thing you typically do in design analysis is to read what the designers wrote down. In this case, the design team of DE really wants to achieve, and I quote, Valkyr Rework focuses on her core identity, the rage of a berserker. She is receiving a top to bottom ability refresh, including an updated passive that leans into a new mechanic, rage. With this, we've intended to capture the essence of reckless commitment, no breaks allowed. Let's highlight the term, the rage of a berserker, top to bottom ability refresh, capture the essence of reckless commitment. What is highlighted is the key terms of what defines this rework, and thus should the rework be analyzed with such basis in mind. Starting for her passive, she now has a rage meter, and I quote, Valkyr's updated passive will work hand in hand with a new mechanic, rage. Valkyr's passive generates rage after killing and hitting enemies with melee weapons. Rage will empower any melee weapons she uses, including Hysteria, as well as provide some survivability. The purpose of this rage meter is to allow Valkyr to gain 5 seconds of invulnerability if she was to take little damage when the bar is 50% full or above. Looking at this in a vacuum, this is a powerful passive. But the fact that it is supposed to be a mechanic that is specific to this frame, yet not being tied to her kit in any way nor have any noticeable impact to what she is doing other than more damage, is just weird at best, incoherent and uninspiring at worst. Do keep in mind that I will come back to this later on for a specific reason. Anyways, let's move on to her first ability where things start to not making sense. On top of previous iteration of this ability, it now has a new function, grouping. If you land your hook on an enemy, Valkyr will pull in enemies that is 9 meters around said enemy. In a vacuum, this seems not half bad for an ability, but the moment you look at it in a bigger picture, everything just falls apart for this ability, viability and design-wise. Does this new add-on of grouping representing everything that your idea really trying to aim? None. The visual already fails to sell the feeling of rage. This is not rage. This is some dark magic that Valkyr just learned so that she can duplicate ropes to pull everyone in. You call this the rage of a berserker? What is it even? That's why I said, in a vacuum. And the fact that she already had a grouping that is her third with an augment just reeks of the design team not bringing their thoughts into their proposed rework, lacking proper understanding and just don't know what they want to achieve here in the first place. And don't get me started on the viability of this ability. This ability as a grouping tool is just a complete failure. Limited to needing to have enemies around the hit target is already cutting off a lot of versatility and flexibility that almost all other grouping tools have. And you know what? The grouping fails to even group enemies up properly if they are at the outer edge of the radius. I am literally standing at this distance, and you tell me I'm still not grouping them up properly to an acceptable degree. This means that the base 9 meter radius when you mod for range is way lower than expected in 95% of the cases. And the grouping tool that fails to group enemies up well is a new kind of failure of its own. Why even use it? Why even had it existed in her kit? Her third ability with augment is just a way better grouping tool. Not only it is more thematic for someone like Valkyr, most importantly, it actually works as a grouping tool. Not this whatever grouping it is being added to her first. Yes, the melee auto attack is cool, I really appreciate that, and the idea genuinely processed great premise, but why even when the grouping just don't make it be able to make use of nicely? There's just so many cool ideas you could do with this ability. With such a blank slate, it's not hard for anyone to come up with a great idea that could easily resemble the idea of quote-unquote the rage of a berserker. And this is what you came up? Enough of the first ability, let's move on to the second ability, Warcry. Warcry basically functions the same as before, but with a few key notes. Instead of a 25-meter base buff that can linger even if the teammates leave the radius, it's now a affinity range buff that couldn't linger once the teammates leave the aura. The ability can now be recast, and the slow has been moved to other places. What's genuinely special about these changes? Not only the core identity, aka the rage of a berserker, is not even being applied here. The changes are at best nothing burgers, at worst making this ability way less active because why must the slow of a second be at her third ability? The fact that you give that ability a recast and remove the only best reason you would want for a recast is just a disguised nerf to her second ability. It gives no real reason to recast at all. Other than you wanna snapshot a better buff, you're better off slap Eternal War in and pretend that this ability button didn't exist now, like always. You had a chance to implement an incentive to make recast meaningful, and yet none was being added. The ability's name is literally Warcry, and it's nothing but a peaceful yawn for me because this is just lazy. There's nothing new, and you are not even trying to implement quote-unquote capture the essence of a raging berserker or quote-unquote the rage of a berserker. I'm just in a loss of words. Whatever, man. Let's take a look at the third ability. The ability itself is still practically the same, but now it gains base 50% melee damage vulnerability, a base 30% slow, costs 25 energy instead of 5, no more shield cost, a smoother casting, and a better line of sight detection. The augment has been changed into a ragdoll instead of a knockdown, but still maintain the ground finisher setup, which on one hand, it is pretty much fine for the change. On the other hand, also makes not much sense. If you check what is the definition of paralysis really is, it states that it is the inability to move certain body parts due to a nervous system problem. Paralysis shouldn't slow the affected ones, it should literally have them crippled, or else why should this ability even call paralysis? You should literally have your enemies paralyzed and simply fall to the ground around you. The visual just isn't matching the name. Generally, this ability don't have much issue, but still not a small one regardless. Perhaps when we take a look at the fourth, everything should be better, right? Now comes the key part, Hysteria, and this is where the shits hit the fan. Valkyr Talons no longer grant invulnerability, and armor buff from Warcry is triple when Hysteria is active. Okay, that's an astronomical change. Let's see the reasons behind, and I quote, "Currently, Valkyr has one of the highest armor stats, with room to acquire much more. But that armor becomes meaningless with Hysteria's invulnerability. Here, we aim to amplify Valkyr's armor capabilities, combined with a death prevention while above 75% rage, which is changed to 50% and lifesteal improvements." Is it just me or anyone who is behind this rework is paying any attention? Highlight this sentence. But that armor become meaningless with Hysteria's invulnerability. Yes, no more invulnerability on Hysteria. But even if you take a few seconds to read what her passive does, you just straight up contradict yourself, your very own idea. You just cannot make this up. Guys, we wanna make her armor meaningful, so we buff her base HP and armor up by a great margin and allow her Hysteria to provide 3 times armor buff when active. And wait, we also try to remove the invulnerability so that health can be utilized even more. But somehow, we also make this into a passive. What do you guys think? Bro, we just got Does Not Make Sense release, but who would have thought a prime access of Does Not Make Sense Prime will drop immediately after? Even someone with zero clue on how to make a good character kit can tell you that this just doesn't make sense. This is just ridiculous that you are confident enough to post this on forums with an absolutely contradicting, clashing idea and think that this is fine and ready to be shipped on the update. You sincerely think that this is up to a proper design standards. You try to make sure that armor can be made use of properly by removing the invulnerability. But the fact that there's literally a passive that is just free invulnerability gating that has no cooldown without you even investing in anything is just baffling to know. Everything that this idea of yours wanna achieve just got completely nullified by the existence of a passive in every way. Invulnerability is just one of the pinnacle survivability methods, and invulnerabilities has been a problem that is just not easy to tackle. Invulnerability and health tanking as a whole has been a hot topic, and for 95% of the times, invulnerability is just a better method of surviving. Instead of trying to tackle the invulnerability problem, nothing is being done about it. And instead of limiting it to only when you use Hysteria like it used to before, it's now available for every melee weapons, but the issue never goes away. Very experienced players are absolutely going to passive decade spam all over the place on Valkyr, because that's absolutely the best way to survive on Valkyr on any levels of content, even level cap. What a surprise, right? Why do you even spend resources on expensive double or triple Umbro mods and possibly 2 Umbro formats, health and armor arcanes to make you more tankier for higher levels, when you're better off just spam invulnerability gate and be unkillable? This not only frees up more mod space for comfort augments, more strength to allow better attack speed, better talent based damage, and just more flexibility in her builds and overall performance, more range so that your grouping tools is not as bad to use, have better damage vulnerability application, and just a better way of modding Valkyr. I don't go against modding for a health tanking build, but the existence of this invulnerability gating just gives so little reason for anyone to mod for it if you want to get the most out of Valkyr. What's the difference between this new Valkyr and old Valkyr? They are still abusing invulnerability. Armor and health is still as useless on both versions of Valkyr. What's the point of even implementing these health tanking related buffs if you straight up provide a way cheaper, way superior method of absorbing damage? I don't even want to mention the fact that you take its invulnerability away and yet gives nothing to replace the previous thing that makes Valkyr Talons special. Ask yourself a question. What makes an exalted weapon an exalted weapon? Exalted weapons, no matter you are a primary, a secondary, they are inherently special, and they have traits or playstyles that truly separate them from the rest of the rosters. Tell me, what makes Valkyr Talons special? It's like the design team didn't know that an invulnerability that is quote-unquote talents only is Valkyr Talons' uniqueness. Everything that what Hysteria used to be is the very thing that separated Valkyr Talons from the rest of the melee weapons. Its identity is now on a passive, and inevitably it rings the death of Valkyr Talons' identity. The 3 times armor and lifesteal may look nice, but as explained before, why? You better off just utilize the invulnerability that her passive provide. I'm not saying that Talons is not strong. It is very strong. Even with a low base status chance, she can still make use of melee influence, but it's no longer any unique, any special. On top of its melee influence game is not as good as others too. When the invulnerability was moved to a passive and refurbished instead of tying it to an ability, players may think, oh, that's good because we hate passive invulnerability. But these are incredibly short-sighted view on the rework itself, and just lack further idea on just how poorly designed this was. Why, you may ask? Remember that I said we will come back to her passive? Yeah, this is the time. The way the passive stacks is as follow: 1% of rage meter or 3% melee damage per melee hits, 4% of rage meter or 12% melee damage per melee kill, and 9% of rage meter or 27% melee damage per finisher kills. Seems fine, right? In reality, it is everything but fine. Look closely. I will give you 5 seconds to think. Pause if you want more time. Got it? Yes? No? Doesn't matter if you are wrong. So, there are 3 answers. The first answer is that it treats every other weapons equally, and this is especially worse on per melee kill, which means that the kill from a meta slot-fluent weapon is the same as you killing an enemy on her talents. This is nothing but a very poorly thought out design, akin to Saren giving away Toxin Lash at full effectiveness to every other warframe. With how her talents already struggle on achieving unbelievable KPMs due to subpar utilization of melee influence, it comes to a point that you can just subsume it up and replace it with raw and all-in on the slot. And honestly, it actually just performs better due to all types of melee kill is the same, causing all prime users of melee influence weapons to just shit on Hysteria, which is just bad design. Second answer lies on top of the per melee hit mechanism, which may seem fine, but the problem is stances with multi-hit combos oftentimes are more likely to abuse this way better than weapons that doesn't have that, not including the fact that slaying radio hits also count as melee hits. If you take a blind guess, excluding heavy attack moves, can you tell me which combo in Valkyr Talons has the best multi-hit? Yes, it's the slide attack again! The design of allowing melee hits to stack rage disproportionately incentivizes slide attack over any moves within Talons on top of the already insane damage of 2250% per second, which is a bit more than 2 times of her second strongest move, even after them getting their multipliers buff. This makes Talon's slide attack to be even more prominent than before, and grouping tools just ain't salvaging this. For what people has been complaining about Valkyr's very heavy reliance on slide attack, this exacerbates the problem even more. Third, you see this rage gain per finisher kills. It is also being disproportionately rewarded with a more than double the amount gain compared to melee kills. Consider that Valkyr Talons already had an impossibly strong multiplier of 54 times on ground finishers. Why is it still being additionally rewarded, even heavily incentivized? This causes an even more severe problem where finishers are so heavily rewarded and incentivized that not even slide attacking is worth anything here. Chances are, if you were to group anything up with your third, which is the better and more consistent grouping tool, you better off just press X to execute finishers, because not only it is the strongest damage output, it also rewards you the heaviest, leaving no rooms for any other types of talents build to thrive. The design and intention behind this passive brings more frictions and problems to Valkyr more than the positive benefits, leaving her kit feeling incomplete, rigged against herself in a way that it forces a certain build to stay competitive, sacrificing almost all the build variety in the meantime. Whatever, you want some builds? I may be harsh and very candid, but still, I would try my best to salvage what is remaining, and these are the 2 builds that I come up with. First one is Slot Kill. Just the melee influence slot you would expect for a melee-centric warframe. High range is to allow the damage vulnerability to be applied more consistently each time I nuke rooms with the better usual slot weapons, but if you don't care, just all in on strength. If you don't want raw, Omamori is also an excellent choice. Second one should be Dimension Breacher Valkyr, but after even more testing, I find this build very pointless. Thus, it is no longer here. Third is just the classic finisher Valkyr, nothing special about this. She already deal level cap ready damage, so I replaced her first with Omamori. Wait, arcane trickery. Because she does finisher like it's nothing, this allows her to basically upkeep this like it's nothing. You can opt for a subsume that helps her energy economy instead. This is the strongest Valkyr Talons build, and I personally think it's not even close because it's just that strong and effective. Here's the shard. Focus School is either Unairu if you replace her talents, and Madurai if you choose to keep it. That's all. Showcase wise, I think I have shown these two builds enough throughout the video, don't I? This rework is a failure on many fronts. Truth be told, I may not like this, but I try. Yet, I have not seen works this lazy, this uninspiring, this creatively bankrupt. I want you to know that this Valkyr isn't weak. Valkyr under the right condition, right investment can shine very well. I can provide you good builds and prove that she can work with proper care given. But what is even the point of playing Valkyr if a core identity is forced to be one-dimensional, even optional? If you were to turn her into just another melee weapons platform because it's actually better, Valkyr just ain't Valkyr anymore. Her passive is poorly designed. Her first is boring and not making sense in teaming and can't even do the grouping job well. Her 2 become less active and just a 1 press and basically lasts for whole mission with an augment. The 3 is good enough for a change but still have illogical parts. And the 4 can downright becomes another melee weapon with no worthy compensation for said exalted. In this current state, there is so much more to be desired. Where is the utilization of the Berserker teaming outside of the passive that isn't just half of all Hysteria? Where do we even try to tackle the invulnerability dilemma? Where's the completeness that players within this community are mentioning? I see nothing but incompleteness, clashing concepts, and overlapping ideas. There's just nothing new added to Valkyr. I could argue on that. It even deducts on what makes her good but quite off meta. This is the most nothing burger and genuinely the worst rework of all time. There's just nothing different. This rework just ain't the Pablo magic. Whatever. Enough beating the already dead cat. As always, I'm not just gonna talk shit and provide no alternative solution to this. My suggestions at the end of the day is really just based on how I see things, and it may not be perfect for everyone nor the best idea in this world. I'm not a DE employee and all I can do is give feedback, but regardless, I will try to provide you my thought process when an idea is suggested. I will be bringing in the same intention for this rework, but condensed into point forms. The Rage of a Berserker capture the essence of reckless commitment. There are 2 ideas here, both focusing on different perspectives. For the first idea, say this is the very final iterations of the rework and you just don't want to change all the ideas here. As much as I utterly disagree with such approach, I can still respect that. But no matter what, her passive definitely needs tuning. The problem of her passive is that it treats other weapons equally, causing other better clearing weapons to be better at stacking passive over Hysteria in 90% of the case, while heavily incentivized multi-hit combos on top of finisher kills completely outshadows every talent's build. For this, my solution is to only allow melee kills to stack rage, but with a catch. Melee kills grant 4%, kills from Hysteria grant 8%, whether it is finisher or not. This is to ensure that the meter is always rigged to Hysteria's benefit more than other melees, while not completely discouraging any other melees to be paired with Valkyr, or making finisher builds the default best build for her due to the insane passive stacking speed and damage. Obviously, this only solves the problem mostly. With how many things is on the line, chances are you are still most likely to abuse slide attack and finisher builds. But at least with how this is structured, Other builds have more breathing room for them to thrive. That's it. But if you wish to take suggestions and make great changes, please hear me out. Second idea is that I will completely remove the invulnerability on the passive and give it back to Hysteria. But instead of just letting a quote-unquote but dead armor become meaningless with Hysteria's invulnerability, why not try to tackle on this invulnerability on Valkyr and make it more healthy, more synergistic in the long run? It's not that armor or even health cannot be meaningful under the effects of invulnerability, it's just that you aren't really channeling enough creativity and imagination power. Those pool of sacrifices you got aren't filling up enough to have the god of creativity satisfy, you know. Enough messing around. I will also lower the melee damage percentage down to just 150%, since without something to constantly have it drop down to 0, it is very natural to give it less power in return. On top of that, I would also like to make this rage mechanic to be more pronounced in a kit by allowing it to affect all her abilities in any shape or form. The meter itself still stacks the same way like before, but now cannot go above 80% if Hysteria isn't active. As for her first ability, the changes and additions are kept, but instead of being used as a grouping tool, it's now a complete different thing. Now, you will pull towards the enemy, marking them for execution, initiating a melee attack upon arrival. If you are able to make their health drop to the execution threshold of 40% in a 1 second base period, you will gore them, splatter the enemy and immediately gain a set 15% rage and have a fixed 100% chance of dropping a health orb. Enemies around base 10 meter within line of sight of the execution location are completely terrified, stunning them briefly at place, which is around 2 seconds flat, and are 50% more susceptible to Valkyr's wrath, akin to a melee damage vulnerability permanently. The higher range you have, the easier it is to reach the execution threshold and more chance to drop an additional health orb on top of a guarantee one, to a maximum of 100% chance and an execution threshold of 80%. This suggestion not only tries to capture the rage of a berserker and reckless commitment by recklessly pulling yourself into enemies and goring bodies to not only show your genuine rage, and it also shows that your rage is so uncontrollable that you become the very embodiment of unfiltered violence. And you cannot blame that enemies around you who witness this are being absolutely terrified. Now, her second ability, Warcry. The changes given to this ability is still maintained, but now we add more things to really make the teaming shine. Instead of just another cast once and forever forget with the use of Eternal War Augment, I will add incentives to make the recast more impactful. First, upon casting the ability or recast, Valkyr gain a set 75% movement speed that decays linearly within the next 3 seconds and can scale with ability duration. Rage dictates how long the speed burst lasts and how strong the speed boost can be, up to doubling both speed duration and strength at maximum amount of rage. For the subsumable variant, the speed buff is set to 50% and only the 3 second base duration. Second, you also gain 10% rage on casting or recast. Third, instead of just the boring flat value for its attack speed buffs, now it is also affected by rage, starting from 30% to 70% at max rage, and it's live updated. The subsumable version is still 30% base. While the buffs added for this ability are simple, they also serve to emphasize the teaming more than just flat attack speed and armor buff. Each time that she does a Warcry, she gets angrier. Her adrenaline pumps and makes her go very fast, and also fits into the reckless commitment that the rework is trying to get across. The angrier she gets, the faster she also runs and attacks, which all can encapsulate the rage of a berserker well, while not bloating her kit with pointless additions. Her third ability is still the same as before, but with now the damage vulnerability being moved to her first ability, and should this ability fully dedicated to both crowd control and grouping. Now, this ability should implement a tap and hold functionality. Tap functionality allows the Valkyr to paralyze enemies around 10 meters of her, leaving them falling down and lying hopelessly on the ground, unable to move for a base 10 seconds. Paralyzed enemies are susceptible to immediate execution from her first ability. Whole functionality basically baked in the prolonged paralysis augment. You pull enemies in and leave them susceptible to ground finishes. Since the augment is now baked in, I will introduce a new one, unending paralysis. Killing paralyzed enemies re-triggers the paralyzing aura. Enemies killed by finisher attacks have a 50% chance to re-trigger the pulling effect. Pulling chance scales with strength, up to 100%. Since the initial concept of this ability generally doesn't have much problem, I don't make much changes here and instead just bake in the current augment and make its CC capability much more fitting with a bit of synergy on top. Although in my heart I want to make Talons way cooler with other special additions like Eternal Claws that hit enemies along with her, become a whirlwind of death when heavy attacking and so on, but knowing that such drastic suggestion will oftentimes lead to nothing, thus I will just stick with what Talons had right now and just make the suggestions based on that. Anyways, since I mentioned that I'm bringing back the invulnerability to Talons, all the Talons rated buffs and changes are kept, the 3x armor buff is removed for a better suggestion later down the road. Rhino's Iron Skin shows a very interesting concept that Valkyr can make use of as well, which is that armor directly affects the number of Iron Skin. This concept has shown great potential and it shows that armor can be beneficial if you were to make a key component of your invulnerability, which is exactly what I'm gonna do this time. First, as you active Hysteria, rage meter is no longer capped. Upon reaching 100%, any melee kills you get now provide you 0.5 seconds of invulnerability, stacking up to 3 seconds of invulnerability. Upon losing the invulnerability, rage meter will drop down to 80%. Now armor value directly affects how many seconds you gain for killing an enemy. Starting with a fixed 0.5 seconds per kill, every 100 armor increases the invulnerability period per kill by 0.01 seconds, up to a cap of 2 seconds, which is when you have 15k total armor value on Valkyr. This also applies to the maximum seconds of invulnerability Valkyr is able to accumulate. For every 100 health that Valkyr had, this period is increased by 0.1 seconds, up to 10 seconds when Valkyr reaches 7000 health. Obviously, these breakpoints are to visualize the increase. It will simply adapt to the current health and armor you had. Imagine you had something like 3050 armor and 2220 health. It will just be an additional 0.305 seconds of invulnerability per enemy kill and 2.22 seconds more on the max invulnerability seconds. This change not only is to try to make Valkyr's invulnerability actually an active invulnerability design like Rebecca intended it to be, it also makes all the buffs that Pablo is trying to incorporate into her and the intention of make use of her high armor value actually being utilized. It now works in unison to achieve the same goal, as now modding for health and armor directly increases the effectiveness of her invulnerability instead of being another situation where they are rendered useless by the existence of invulnerability periods. As you can see, the idea is actually very simple. No complicated maths, no hard to understand mechanics, but it is this exact idea that has become the very element that finally allows the yin and yang to be balanced. As for both her Hysteria augments, they should basically just be reworked, but I have no idea for them, so I will just leave it at that. So that's literally everything for today's yapping session. The rework may be really bad in terms of design, but it doesn't mean it's all just bad. There's still some great qualities in it, like the melee attack upon arrival with a first, but unfortunately, the bad just outweighs the good too much, leaving me so little good to speak about for this rework. I may come across as angry and my words may be exceptionally harsh. It's just because I speak passionately. I gave all my heart to give credit to what is worth to be credited, but do expect me to talk shit on something when said thing is worth to be criticized. As always, my suggestions are definitely not the best. They are susceptible to be challenged by other ideas. So if you think this can be delved deeper, or you had your own way of tackling this dilemma, feel free to leave an essay. Anyways, yep, session done. See you all next time. Goodbye.